Irwin, it is great to see you. It has been since 2008 when we met in New York, and I'm just going to briefly explain how I got to know you. And that was, I believe, in early 2008. You were speaking at the San Francisco Jewish Community Center about your recently published book, Yearnings: Embracing the Sacred Messiness of Life, which I bought. I loved hearing your description of how to apply Jewish wisdom to everyday life. And I bought the book, but I also noted to my husband, I think this guy is a deadhead. There was something about the way you walked across the stage and told your stories. And then when I bought the book and came up to you for signing it, I said, I really loved your presentation. It kind of reminded me of being at a Grateful Dead concert. And you got up, pulled out your wallet, and said, I carry the tickets to my favorite show. And that was the beginning of then saying, well, this is a very special connection. And then I was visiting in New York City in the summer of 2008. A good friend from Congregation Emmanuel connected us, and you agreed to have lunch. And I explained to you the world as it could be, still relatively new at that time, and how its part of its structure was informed by the B'nai Mitzvah. And given your background, I thought I wanted to hear what you thought about it. And what I recall vividly is you saying, oh, this is perfect. You're going to be in a public school. The UDHR is your sacred text. All you need is a party and food, and you're good. and with that inspiration, that's what we've been doing ever since. I've thrown a bunch of different parties for young people. Wow. Happy to provide the food. And as it speaks, today we're doing a project with a second grade class called I Am Me and I Am Part of Us. And we'll have their culminating presentation March 24th. And the first one we did in December, the kids loved the food, just like So thank you for that inspiration. And now we want to turn the spotlight on your work at TWAICB, which is the Center for Learning and Leadership, and hear more about your work so that we can spotlight it to people and that you might be able to use what we have as a result for your audiences.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's great to see you again after all these years, and it's been a long, strange trip, as they say, and I think the work you've been doing is really remarkable. I mean, so much of what's going on in the world is bigger than we think we can handle, and so there's a lot of paralysis. And actually, what we need is thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people being able to bring all of who they are to their sphere of influence. And you've really done it at a high level, and I do think I do think the universal rights is a new sacred text, and sacred texts don't just drop into the world. It takes hundreds and hundreds of years for a sacred text to be canonized and become what we call a sacred text. Before the text is sacred, it's just a text that people are beginning to take seriously, and before they take it really seriously, you don't even hear of it, most people. So the process of that is hundreds of years. And this will be faster than that, because we need it to be faster than that. But that is how it emerges.
Well, that's encouraging. I guess that means I probably won't get to see it officially as a sacred text.
Anything that was genuinely sacred lives and flourishes well beyond us. That's actually another issue in the society, right? We think we have to solve the problems of the world and it's on us. No. We're all both, at most what we do, if it's great, we're constantly seeding the drama, and that's what you've done. And so it's very cool. And I'm glad after all these years, here we are. You got to admit, it's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. I'm delighted. I'm just so happy. So let's talk about TWAICB. And I'm wondering if you could explain what is the work carried out by TWAICB and who is involved in this work?
Yeah, so first of all, TWAICB, the Center for Learning and Leadership, it was founded in 1974 by Elie Wiesel,
Oh, yeah.
very famous writer and author and public intellectual who passed away a few years ago, Elie Wiesel, who and a man named Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who and who's still alive and healthy. They founded in 1974, and it was designed to be an institution originally for the leadership in American Jewish life, the organizational leadership, philanthropic leadership, and the religious leadership, to help them be able to navigate the very different circumstances Jews were living in by the late 70s in a place like America, and with the establishment of the state of Israel in the light of the Holocaust, that those events, those new conditions required a reimagining of how Jews would be in the world. And leaders would have to learn in a different way so that they could lead in a different way. And it was fundamentally committed to a robust pluralism that in a moment of great transition, which the Jewish community, Jewish people, Jewish body politic was going through, pluralism and locating the partial truths of many, many different views would be central to moving forward. Now, I came to Klal in 1987. And by the mid 90s, sort of I had moved into the leadership of Klal, and we shifted Klal from we pivoted, one would say, from being an organization primarily working in the Jewish space with leaders to working sort of in the American space. And now, over the last 25 years, what we really work on is we help leaders and prospective leaders across all backgrounds and all sectors, right, to navigate the destabilizing technological and cultural changes that have paralyzed us, that have created tremendous polarization and partisanship. And we help those leaders by giving them different sorts of tools to lead lives with imagination and character and wisdom. And we draw on a lot of different lenses. We work in a lot of different sectors, but it's all towards future leaders and present leaders being able to lead in their organizations, in their communities, in their businesses, in their foundations, or whatever their platforms, to develop the capacities, intellectual capacities, psychological capacities, spiritual capacities, to see the possibilities in this moment, as opposed to just the negatives in this moment, to really discern the possibilities in this moment, and to co-create deeply pluralist, prosperous, flourishing communities.
How do you do that? I mean, how are the ways that you?
So we run a wide variety of programs, things from, we have the only spiritual entrepreneurship collaboration with the business school in the United States. We have a collaboration with Columbia Business School, where we take faith-rooted leaders who no longer want to work inside of conventional congregational settings, but who actually want to use their wisdom, their spiritual, religious wisdom, and their other forms of capital, social capital, human capital, financial capital, to solve real problems in the world, and who want to launch ventures. That's a 7-year-old program. We've launched 165 ventures, and those ventures could be anything from groups of people who are working on literacy problems, to working on prison reform, to working on loneliness, to working on the hunger, homelessness, but using their faith sort of base and their faith-rooted wisdom in launching ventures that solve real problems. And the genius of that program, and I would say in this respect, it's a paradigmatic sort of moment, is none of those faith-rooted leaders have as their goal to get more people to be like them. The goal isn't to get more people to be Protestant, or get more people to be Catholic, or get more people to be Jewish, or get more people to be Hindu, or get more people to be Muslim. It is to use one's community's wisdom and variety of form of capitals to solve a real problem in the world. And I think that's a very, very, very big shift. It's the shift from thinking about how to get people to be more like you to how do you use all of the assets and forms of capital and capacities and talents that your community has or that your wisdom tradition has to actually solve a real problem and serve. That's a very big shift, because most institutional religion in the United States is, for good reason, has a lot of anxiety about whether they're going to be able to transmit their own wisdom and in a sense continue. And we shift that anxiety, rather than having anxiety about whether you'll survive as your religious community. Shift it and say, do you have resources that you can actually use to serve? And it's a fascinating. So that would be one. That's a very big thing, because that's 165 people who've been through the program already. There's an alumni of that. So we have 200 people in a pipeline for that. We're trying to help other business schools set that up who are interested in spiritual entrepreneurship. So that would be one example of what we do. But then we do a lot of consulting with foundations. We do consulting with other think tanks. We do consulting with different groups of religious leadership. And we do consulting with different businesses. A venture capital firm, for instance, will call me or call one of us and on faculty, invite us in to talk about the next iterations of capitalism, remoralizing capitalism, the fights around ESG. And that's, again, wherever there's polarization, wherever there's partisanship, wherever there's a destabilizing because of the technological and cultural change, that's where we enter and help people have more robustly pluralist conversations in which they can grow to some higher order understanding of whatever it is they're facing. And that's the key. There's always a higher order, more integrated way of seeing whatever problem you're seeing when that problem is causing great polarization.
So what are the ways that you could describe how this work actually touches the lives of the different people or groups of people?
So I'll give you some stories. I'll give you an example. There's a remarkable African Methodist minister in Harlem, amazing guy. He's actually a third generation in his church. His father and his grandfather founded the church, and now he had been in the prison system when he was younger, came out and realized, okay, time to grow up, time to take over. He'll take over his father, but wasn't interested. He's not animated by making sure that thousands of people are in his church on Sunday. He wanted to solve a real problem using the assets and capital and resources of his church to solve a real problem. The problem that for him was a real serious was the pipeline from junior high school to prison that is in Harlem. To launch a venture, faith-rooted leaders get no education in how to launch a venture. You learn how to be a minister, a congregational rabbi in a seminary, but you get no launching a venture skills. He got into this program. Now he's a unique. I mean, so many people are remarkable, and we're leaving so much talent on the ground. That's a separate issue. He's brilliant. He is street smart. You want to rub up against him because he's so loving and soft and fierce. He spent 16 weeks in this program. Got the data on what the problem really is, how many people, what's going on, and he had an idea. His innovation was, let's start block by block and let's create relationships on that block between men and kids in school who will be accountable to each other. He started on one block, and he had crazy only on that block. I don't want anybody worrying about anybody from a different block. It has to be on that block. A sort of really understanding of the local embodied quality of accountability, one would say. And well, it turned out he did a beta of it in this program, right? That's what you do, like a minimum viable product is what it's called, an MVP. He worked with the police, he worked everybody, because all different sorts of people have to be involved. Well, within 3 months, there was some crazy, I don't remember exactly the statistics, but it was like 47% less people in the pipeline.
Wow.
And it turns out within 6 to 8 months, he did another block, built out the pitch deck, built out the business plan, and he got a multi-million-dollar grant from the city. So, that's big.
That's
But
very,
I can tell you another story of a rabbi in Providence who he decided that something was off. Jews were eating matzah on Passover, the unleavened bread on Passover, and it was supposed to be about freedom and it's supposed to be about liberation. But it was really just like many rituals, just fetishized. All rituals get fetishized in most communities, right? And it got lost, the connection. And he decided, no, he was going to do something else. He had an idea to create a artisanal matzah, because artisanal was big in the culture now, an artisanal matzah that actually would be more true to the tradition, not hard and stuff, but it actually could be soft, but made according to Jewish law, obviously a little more expensive, that could be frozen, but that all profits would go to address the issue of trafficking. And on the packaging of the matzah, right, would be the sort of, it's not like, Manischewitz or not like Streitz for that, but no, on the packaging would be, here's matzah. Matzah is the symbol of both slavery and freedom. Buying this matzah will not only connect you to, right, the story of Passover, etc., but profits are going to a variety of different spaces in trafficking. Now, that's a pretty wild thing, and it turned out the venture launched, and he is selling around Passover time a lot of matzah. And that's a very interesting thing, because that's a reconnection of a ritual with the job the ritual is actually supposed to get done. And of course, in a place like America, it's not only Jews who are going to do that, because Passover, right, and the Exodus story is as alive to many Christians in this country as it is alive to Jews in this country. And so people beyond the Jewish community are purchasing that. So he had an idea, a venture that would use the wisdom of his own tradition, my tradition, to solve a problem. And the problem isn't, how do I make people more Jewish? The problem is, how do I use Jewish to make people more deeply human?
Yeah.
And that's a big shift. Not how do I make people this African method, how do I make people more Christian? No, it's how do I use my African Methodist tradition and my people to solve a real problem about, talking about, universal rights. Our prison systems and our justice systems have some issues, like,
Yeah.
and so there is like intervening in a deeply, deeply compassionate, disciplined, persevering way to literally save young people. So that's another. We have 160 of them. So there's and that's just that program that is just that venture program. But then we'll work with foundations, right, that are struggling with, I know this sounds funny, but it's hard to spend money wisely. And there's a lot of gatekeeping around philanthropic money. And there's, a lot of issues around that. Let's put it this way. So we'll help foundations remember what it is they really want to do. It's like religion in a certain way. Very often the genius of a religion is, let's say here, to connect to the universal human rights, at least the Western religions had this tremendous intuition early on that every human being was an image of God, that every human being had infinite value, that every human being was equal, that every human being was unique. And that's a tremendous intuition that we're still trying to realize that intuition. very often in the working out of our systems, our economic systems, our health systems, our religious systems, our business systems, we forget that that's actually the goal. That the goal of a business, profitability is an absolute necessary means, but the goal of a business is to create a more prosperous society, one in which every stakeholder is taking every stakeholder's interests into account, right? That's the deepest understanding of what business is supposed to do. Well, the same with religion, the same with education, but they get so complex and they get so distorted that they get disconnected from the vision. That's why we need new sacred texts, because the sacred texts themselves are not working for most people. That's why the Universal Declaration becomes important, because it's a fresh, if I could say, like if you chanted it, you'd see the sacredness in a different way. But because we read things in a secular way, so, but we need these, oh yes, that's the goal. Oh yeah, right, that's the goal of what it means to be a human being, which we're just beginning to learn. I mean, don't murder is really less than 3,000 years old, right? We're just beginning to recognize that, right? For most of human history, it was okay to murder, and it's definitely okay to murder if there were power differentials, right? So it's a lot of this is brand new in the development of human beings. I think that's what, if you ask what TWAICB really does, TWAICB is at the forefront of helping human beings and leaders, especially and prospective leaders, lead towards developing a world in which every human being is treated as an image of God. That's really what we do. And there's a lot of ways to do that. You can do consulting, and you can do speeches, and you can run programs, and we run young leadership programs and leadership and senior leadership programs. We can be, like I said, working in a foundation. We can working in a VC firm, right? It's very hard if you're an investor. Here's an example of people we work with. We work with, let's say, asset managers. Okay, asset managers are people who have money in portfolios, right? They're managing money. They may be at 30, 40, 50, 60 stocks, and people are beginning to realize, yikes, you know what? Maybe that's the ESG stuff. Maybe not even if it makes money, maybe we shouldn't be investing in it. But that's very hard. That's really going counterculture. So where do you get the capacity to go counterculture that way? And still recognize that if you're working for a major firm and you're an asset manager, you do have to have returns as long as you're working in that system. So how do you, in a team, have a conversation about, you know what, I don't feel we should invest in that. And then there's a real debate. Is that the role of business? Is that the role of an investor? Right? Maybe that's government's role to say that's not a legitimate business. Maybe that's NGO's role. Maybe it's not the business's role. And having those sorts of conversations where issues are really polarized and people have legitimate views on all sides, right? Sometimes I say what we do is we help people discover that we discern the signal from the noise. There's a lot of noise, but even the people you hate have signal. And that's a really important thing, because the ethos of TWAICB and my ethos and sort of my reflex is that every human being, it's not like that every human being is entitled to, right, health and home and education and the protection of the law and all those things. It's all true. And every human being, right, has a partial truth. Every human being, there's a signal that human being is sending out, even if 99% is noise. And if we don't hear that signal metastasizes. And then that signal, right, does a lot of damage. And we work anywhere where there's noise. That'd be another way to put it. Anywhere where there's noise.
That's great. And I think you have actually already pretty much explained this, but I'd love to hear just your clarity about how this work that you're describing intersects with the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You've
Yeah,
said it
so, yeah,
so many ways, but just to
you know,
hone in on that a bit.
once we agree in our organization, sort of as a premise, that every human being is an image of God. Now, you don't have to use that language, but we're quotation marks, so we're based in Jewish wisdom, right? Though we draw on a wide variety of forms of wisdom, including psychology and political science, etc., and neuroscience and cognitive science. But once your assumption is every human being is an image of God, which means every human being is of infinite value, every human being is equal, and every human being is unique. That means every human being has an intrinsic dignity. Now, when you start there, then it's just how continuing the progress in understanding what that means. Well, it turns out for most of human history, we didn't believe that everyone deserved an education. That's very new. It's less than 100 years old, really, that we even believe everybody should have an education. Okay, that everyone should have housing, right? That's pretty new. It's still new. It's still actually not true. Okay, we believe that when you believe that every human being is an image of God and has intrinsic dignity, they should have equal protection under the law. When you believe every human being is an image of God and has intrinsic dignity, that every human being should have some basic health care. When you believe every human being should have the freedom of expression, you can go down the entire, it's every single article, and then the things inside the article are, and now I say are just the application by emerging groups of people of the insight that every human being has intrinsic dignity. And we're growing to learn that. In other words, it's fine that in 1500 or 800 BCE, somebody had the notion that every human being is an image of God and wrote that down in the book of Genesis. That's great. But what image of God means, how it gets applied in the details, that's the evolutionary drama, right? No different than the Constitution. All men are created equal. Okay, it's fantastic. Actually, it's a radically new insight. In the 1700s, it's a radically new insight, right? Yet alone to imagine a country should be organized around that. It turns out as we grow and develop, we recognize, oh, wow, we didn't even know what we meant by that. Here's what we really mean by that, all people. Here's what we really mean by that, women should vote. Here's what we really mean from that. People who we actually enslaved, who we weren't including in that, are now included. That's the drama. And what's interesting about the Universal Declaration, amongst the many things that's interesting about the Universal Declaration, is every so often a society or a group of people inside of a society have enough clarity that they write their Torah down. And I'm using the word Torah on purpose. They write their sacred prescriptions and sacred hopes for the world down, or dreams down, because they're real enough in their taste buds. They're real enough in their souls and spirits and minds and hearts and psychology that they write it down. And it's not like 1 minute that they write it down. It takes years and years. I don't know the exact history, but I imagine that the history of that document starts well before our marking of the history. Whoever knows the most history about that document, whoever knows it, and wherever it's written, I bet you that way before that it began. And now we have this document. And now can we live up to it? And part of living up to it, every business, every organization, every system, every person has to, as best they can, live up to it. And people living up to it will be in arguments, because how to do it, how to ensure that every single person on the planet has access to healthcare, has access to housing. There's no pre-plan on that. That needs to be developed, and we need a lot of different people working on it. The most important thing is everyone's working on it. I am always interested in where the fights about getting the job done happen. Because when the fights get such that it's polarized, people want to win rather than stay on mission of the job.
Right.
Even with the best of motivation that they feel if they win, they'll be able to get the job done better. But it turns out if it's polarized, wherever it's polarized, like it could be on a family level, to a business level, to a nation level, when it's polarized, it means that each side is missing some partial truth, some signal from the other side. It could be a fear, it could be a nightmare, it could be a terror, it could be a trauma. We don't know what it is until we talk about it. It could, and if we could get to that higher order of what it is we're really fighting about, because no one's fighting about everybody should have a home. The most recalcitrant red members of society, okay, because I'm on the blue team, right? So I look at the red team and say, oh my God, that red team. But I meet many people on blue team, red team, purple teams that I don't know if I've ever met in my life someone who said, no, I think people should be homeless. I actually do. I think people should not, if they're hungry, that's their fault. No, when you get to it, no. But we really have deep disagreements about how to realize the truth that every human being is an image of God.
This is inspiring to keep at raising awareness about the Universal
And we have a
Declaration.
pacing. And you know, the other thing is that one of the things that's important when you have these sacred documents is to make sure the document stays alive, and people's interpretations of the document don't rigidify. That's one of the most dangerous things that happen. Look what happened to capitalism. Capitalism is rigidified, and so that we think we're doing free market when we're not, and we think that and it's not like that. It's just rigidifies into tribal sort of interpretations, and that's true in capitalism. It's true in religions, and so we have to also be aware it's fluid. When we read this Universal Declaration, we should read it for the aspirational, fluid, ongoing drama of trying to understand it. We've ridden ahead of who we are. See, that's what a sacred text is. That's another way of putting it. A sacred text has intuitions that are ahead of where even the people who wrote it are. That's what makes it sacred. It has inexhaustible meanings, not one meaning. And so we have to be very careful, especially those of us who are legitimately ahead in understanding the implications. There are people, we are ahead. But that means all the more we have to be aware of what I call sort of the diffusion of innovation, the diffusion regarding social change. There are innovators. Those are the people who, at the very, very beginning, began to put this document together, this sacred text together. Let's call them the innovators in this. Then there are what I call early moral adopters. Those are the people, who knows, they met someone, they saw it, they were involved in a meeting. Someone said, you have to read this. You have to hear about this. And before it got published by before our UN looks at it, before anyone else looks at it, and they go, oh my gosh, and it's still like being moved around, and things are, and Article 1 is like Article 4 becomes Article 3, and A becomes B, and because you have to get it just right in a sacred document, of course. And then you have your late followers, early moral adopters and early moral followers, and they come a little later. And you have late adopters, right? And you have laggards, and you have resistors. And the thing about it is, everyone is in the system. No one is outside. And when early moral adopters listen very carefully to resistors as opposed to just hate resistors, they have a shot of incorporating some of the fears and terrors. And whether those fears and terrors are legitimate or not doesn't matter. They need to be addressed. They have a better shot. I always say to innovators, you'll learn the most about your venture from the people who are most resistant to your venture. The people who are right there with you, they may be very important in building things out because you need them, but you will probably learn very little about your venture from them. Right? So there are late adopters, there are laggards, there are resistors, there are early followers, early adopters. So it's always asked, who are you in the drama? Who are you in the drama? Who do you want to be in the drama? And we're in the drama for a lot of different reasons. Very often the people who you most disagree with, it's not because they're bad people. They really have a different life experience. They really, really do. And very often, sort of the most moral people I met, they have, there's reasons. Our storylines are really, really complicated.
I feel like this is leading to perhaps our closing question, though, hopefully to open up for more questions, but that is, what would you like people in the community to know as leaders, as members of the community, about why the work that Kula is doing is important and how they can actually be involved?
Yeah, look, here's where I probably am a touch of an elitist. I think leaders have tremendous importance in a society. Now, I happen to have an open understanding of leaders in that it's amazing how many people who aren't designated leaders are leaders. People without authority very often can be the very best leaders, and people with authority are often the very worst leaders. So I have a very wide understanding of who leaders are, but leaders are critical. 1. 2, we're living in a moment in which polarization and partisanship and deep disagreement and fragmentation and fracturing is the central leadership problem. We cannot get anything done, right, around the things most of us actually care about on all sides. The most important leaders can do right now is find the higher order integration around the fights that they find themselves in. And Kula is probably one of the best institutions in American life doing that, right? If you're interested, if you find yourself polarized, if you find yourself partisan, if you find yourself getting up and saying, I hate that fucking other side, right? I hate them. I'm okay, you can feel it. But if you feel that and you know something is wrong regarding that, you don't have to become friends, you don't have to, but if you want, and you want tech, tools, resources, capacities, help in transcending and integrating at some higher level in any sector, that's what we do. And more people have the ability to lead than recognize it, than we recognize or that they recognize. I've watched, as you have, I've watched second graders lead. I've watched, right, people who are very, very quotation marks low level in their companies lead. And then I've also met a lot of people with great authority who have risen to the occasion to lead. So, but that's the single most serious issue in my mind that we contribute to, Kula, right? Finding a deeper way to transcend the arguments, the debates, the polarization, the partisanship that is paralyzing and doing great damage to what is a great country, to what is a great country. So that's, and how to get involved, we have a lot of different, we don't work generally with individuals one-on-one that way. We work, if your business wants consulting on this, if your foundation wants consulting on this, if you're a religious group, or a secular organization that wants, like, yes, we don't want to have these fights, this is crazy, we want to actually solve real problems, the best thing to do is to go to clal.org, you know, and play around on the website and you know, and see how where we might be able to help you. But the thing is, and I know this is about sort of the sales moment of our organization, but actually everyone can do it right now. We don't have any magic formula. If everybody simply would do one thing, be a touch more curious about the other every time you judge the other. It's okay. I understand we blame. I get it. I get it. I get it. I get it. But if we could just be a touch more curious, and the way to do that is two ways. One is every week, besides just reading that which affirms who you are, read the best of the other side of something. It doesn't matter what the other side is, because there's so many other sides these days. Read the best of it once a week. It's okay. Read 50 things and blogs and everything we read these days that comes at us. Read 50 things that cheerlead your side. I get it. Read one thing that's the best, not the worst of the other side. Because when you compare your best to someone else's worst, it's amazing how you always come out on top. You know, if you compare your worst every so often with someone else's best, you go, oh my God, I never thought about it quite that way. Maybe that's, if the first thing is to read something, the second is at least once a month have a conversation with someone with whom you disagree. It doesn't have to be with the person you started with the hate, but someone with you disagree, and be curious about how they came to that belief, how they came to that view. Because they didn't come to that view because they're evil people. They came to that view because, well, you don't know why, but it's a combination of their story and their influences and their fears and their hopes and their nightmares and their dreams and their fantasies. And I find when I'm really curious about other people, it's remarkable how the polarization and partisanship doesn't overwhelm the fact that we are each human beings of infinite value and intrinsic dignities. And when you could just taste that, which is actually the core of the Universal Declaration, things begin to move. We begin to wander together a little bit better.
I think that what's so maybe synchronistic about what you just said, I think the whole idea, which I even came to you about, is about the questions and why 4 questions. But that is sort of what started this initiative that we're doing.
Yeah.
It came out of our Passover Seder years ago, where we had what we call 4 other questions that were more open-ended about why should we have these rituals, why should we share with friends, etc., that we then offered in a pre-Thanksgiving newsletter to say, if you're sitting across the table with people you may be in conflict with, try these questions out as a way to find some common bond. And I feel like what you're suggesting, perhaps there's something in
Exactly.
that. Well.
Exactly. That's the curiosity. It's like, you know, I'm not interested in telling other people right now what freedom means, because we're going to argue about it. I'm interested in, tell me the last time you had an experience in which you felt free, and just when was that? Tell me the last time you had an experience of real connection and joy. Tell me the last time you had an experience in which some member of your community cared about. Because we'll work up from there. Tell me the last time in your neighborhood there was a celebration. Tell me, it's what we need to be do is curious about other people's experiences, and then work from the experience out, as opposed to imposing our understanding of whatever it is we're talking about from our own experience. And then you go, oh my gosh, like I remember, yeah, that was great. Wow, that must have been beautiful. Yeah, and then they begin to tell you, and you know, and you begin to get the texture of why it is what freedom meant to them, right? The last time I was really free, last time I really felt freedom, you know, I know it sounds funny, but I put down my phone, and like, it was weird. I put it in my pocket And I was having this conversation. Now that you make me think of it, I really felt free. Wow, okay. Free from distraction, free from,
Interesting.
that's cool. So I don't know what it'd be. And the last time, when I ask people sometimes, when was the last time you had an experience that you would call holy? Not me, you. And people go, let me think about that. Well, I was at the deathbed of my grandmother. And I know, is that right? Because people are always afraid of actually sharing their experience because they're immediately we attack people, right? But yeah, is that holy even though she was dying? And I go, yeah, I don't know. That's amongst the most holiest experiences of every tradition in every religion on the face of the planet. So yeah, I think that's holy. Tell me what you felt. I don't know even the words. Yeah, that's how we know it's holy. It's ineffable good. And what did it feel like? I don't know. It was a combination of I loved my grandmother very much, and somehow I knew, even though I was holding her, she's going to die, the love will make it. The love will make it. Okay, so why don't we start back and let's not use the word holy. Fuck the word holy. It doesn't work anyhow. And let's just see how many spaces we can create the sense that love will swallow up death. Let's start there. Okay. See, when you start with people's experiences of what it is you want to impose on the world, of what we want to impose. I want to impose justice on the world. I want to impose freedom on the world. I want to impose joy on the world. I want to impose equality on the world. When we get rid of those words and go at the experience behind those words, we have a lot to share. Right. And when was the last time, if I have a disagreement about what justice means with someone, I'm not interested in imposing my meaning on justice. Tell me the last time you had an experience in which it felt fair and just. When was the last time you had an experience like that? And people will tell you remarkable stories because these words actually right now, like God, like the word God, these words actually block our feelings. They actually block our experience. They actually filter out everything good. So we argue about justice and don't talk about what it feels like to be in places where, yeah, that felt fair and that felt just.
I feel like, well, we want to spotlight the work of Kula. I'm hoping we'll be able to use some of these presentations you've made to actually help address the polarization. I feel like these are important messages for everybody to
Anyway, it can help it. You don't have to worry about like it has to be perfect for cloud. We're not like that. And just do it so that it helps whatever it is we're all trying to do. That's all that matters. That's the good thing about being 65 and not 42. Absolutely. My organization better make it or it's all, you know what I mean? That's one of the advantages of getting a little older. I have 2 grandchildren now since the last time we've talked. So, I look at it and I say, if everybody just sort of take a deep breath and, I learned to say something. I never knew that the word skeptic meant investigation. A skeptic isn't someone who doubts and is, a skeptic is someone who ongoingly investigates. Or I would say, oh, wow, a skeptic is someone who's ongoingly curious.
Interesting.
Let's be more curious. Let's really be more curious about each other and our experiences. And it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And, sometimes I say it this way. I say, there's no direct routes to anything that are there. Yeah, I mean, GPS gives us those direct routes, which is why we no longer see anything as surprise. And so
not always.
that's the downside of that. But we're the great metaphor for, sort of the journey is wandering. We wander towards ever elusive promised lands, right? And it doesn't matter. Every tradition has its wanderings, right? And the wandering by definition is a struggle. That's the wandering. That's what human life is. It's struggling. And along the ways you have like moments of insight and moments of joy and moments of love and periods of love and good, but that's the struggle of life. So that the really only question, I think, is, with whom do you want to wander?
Mm.
With whom do you want to wander? And it seems to me that for the first time in human history, and it's scary, this is the only thing that's scary to me, is we have no choice but to wander with everyone. I think if we're really honest, for most of human history, you didn't have to wander with everybody. That's the truth. That's the truth. Most people didn't move 7 miles, never traveled 7 miles from their own, or 15 miles from their own. Most people lived in villages at 150. The Dunbar rule was a lot. We really didn't have to wander with everybody. But because of technology and science and communications and quantum connectivity and quantum communications, there's no choice now. Either we wander with everybody, including the people we don't like so much, or we're not going to be wandering at all. And maybe that's really the universal declaration. See, there was an intuition that it's not going to be enough for your little nation state or your little town to have rights. No, it's going to have to be universal. Each nation and each group may have to figure out the particular ways to make it happen. That's where the deep respect for one's own tribe and group and religion and ethnicity and comes into play, and region. But for the first time, it really does have to be universal. Because if it's not universal, we won't get to the promised land.
And it came out of the fact that the atrocities of World War II made it clear something has to change.
Right.
And I think we are at a transition point, not unlike that time, where I think these messages that you've conveyed are vital to hear. And thinking of it in terms of even reviving the aspiration of the UDHR in those circumstances is inspiring. And to realize that it is a journey and it's going to keep going.
Yeah. You know, the famous Jewish teaching is, it's not upon you to complete the work, but you cannot desist from doing the work. You know, it's hard for us, us baby boomers. Like, we thought we'd transform the world, and we did in certain ways, but we thought, like, oh my gosh, but that was hubris. No generation transformed the world,
Right.
Our job is to do as much of the work we can, and, not to complete the work.
Well, here. And I am reminded of how I felt when I heard you speaking about the sacred earnings of life, and that the book offered such great wisdom. And now here we are again.
Great.
I am deeply appreciative, and I'm looking.
Let's keep staying in touch. There's always different intersections with us,
Excellent. Excellent.